I'm a hair mineral analysis expert. I have a background in functional medicine, and I educate people using HTMA testing to maximize health, erase debilitating symptoms, and gain energy. I'm a multi-time kettlebell sport world champion, and I'm constantly searching for high-performance pros from all over the world to bring you this human optimization podcast. My name is Lisa Pitel-Killah. Welcome everybody to a brand new episode of the Human Optimization Podcast. And I'm so excited to have here with me today, Dr. Robert Selig from Chicago. He's a functional medicine practitioner and a hair tissue mineral analysis expert. He's also the founder of Back to Natural Health in Lincoln Park. He offers personalized natural healthcare packages to his local and remote patients to address illnesses and symptoms that are plaguing our society today. And some of them we're going to talk about today. After curing his own adrenal fatigue and spending 30 years in the natural health field, he tailors programs to clients' individual biochemistry by using revolutionary tests like HTMA, a test that provides important cellular information necessary for them to get healthy and stay that way. So welcome, Dr. Robert.
Why, thank you, Lisa. Good to be here.
Well, I'm glad to have you. And so tell us a little bit about you and your practice. I want to hear all about it.
Sure. Well, I've been in practice now for 20 years, and before, I'm a chiropractor, and so my practice incorporates a lot of functional medicine stuff, but in my office we do PMF, we do Rife Technologies, we do chiropractic, acupuncture, we do a whole array assortment of goodies to help really just to get the energy moving in the body. And so before I got into chiropractic school, I was an athletic trainer, so I got to work at the University of Massachusetts in Boston with sports medicine, and that, opened up the door to say, well, I got to take it a step further, and that's when I went to chiropractic school. But as an athletic trainer, I got to see a lot of, knees, ankles, hips, joints, and got to work with that population, which was actually kind of fun.
Oh, that would be fun. Oh my goodness. Yeah, that would be excellent. And what a great combo, because you know what, one of the things that people forget about when we talk about functional medicine, because we're always looking at the functionality of the body, is the energy system.
Yes. The energy system is my passion because I've been studying alchemy and, more the esoteric arts. And so my goal as a doctor, as a practitioner, is to merge the art and the science. You've got to have a balance, and that's where I learned a lot about the minerals through alchemy, which alchemy is the royal science, and it gets thrown under the rug, and it's just it really isn't understood. So as a professional, I want to bring alchemy back to the limelight with the chemistry, because it's an art and science, and when those two worlds merge, then we have a real healing modality. So that's why I love the energy-based medicine stuff.
Oh, that's incredible. And yeah, what a system there. So, wow. So we touched a little bit about HTMA, and feel free to add to that, obviously. But so tell me when you discovered it. So obviously you were studying some energy basis, and that's when HTMA kind of came about, or minerals came into the system for you.
Yeah, I've always been fascinated with minerals, and I remember in chiropractic school, not one mention of magnesium. Now, chiropractic school is a, holistic type of medicine, and yet not one mention of magnesium in 4 years in chiropractic school. We talked about iron, we talked about vitamin C, we talked about calcium, but what we never talked about was magnesium. And so then I started reading a lot of books about magnesium, and that opened up the door to, eventually led me. I need a test that can really understand magnesium, because magnesium is an intracellular ion, and so 99% of the magnesium is in the cell. 1% is in the blood. We probably have about 25,000 milligrams of magnesium, so only 1% is in the blood. So how can a blood test reveal the real status of magnesium? It can't.
Right. It's
impossible. Yeah. And that's when I started finding out about HTMA and the work of Dr. Paul Eck and David Watts and Dr. Larry Wilson, and started really digging into that and just fell in love with hair tissue mineral analysis.
Well, my journey was a little different, but I fell in love with it too. And so give me a little, and amazing that no mention of magnesium. And I mean, that's one of the most important minerals in today's society where we're all chronically stressed.
Magnesium it's the quarterback in the mineral system. Now, I remember reading something on Dr. Boyd, who's a PhD in biochemistry at the University of Washington and Kentucky. He stated that ATP, the energy currency of every cell, if it does not have a magnesium molecule bound to it, it's ineffective. And we know how important energy is to driving all our enzymes and every cellular process. You need an energy source. So without magnesium bound to the ATP in essence won't work. That's how important magnesium is. So when we are trying to establish the status of magnesium, blood will never ever tell us the real status of magnesium. And so just leaving magnesium out of the equation just blew my mind. I was like, how can they leave the most important mineral out of the mineral matrix? And so that's when I started really digging deep into magnesium and hair tissue, and just a whole new world opened up. And so just fell in love with it, and always loved minerals. And when you think about magnesium, it's at the center ring of the porphyrin ring of chlorophyll. That's the juice of plants. And so that's what brings life to everything. It's the food chain that will feed everything, and it starts with the magnesium molecule. And that's why magnesium corresponds to the sun. And so the sun energy captured through photosynthesis, derives the chlorophyll that gives us the juice of life. So love my minerals.
And that was great, because a lot of people probably didn't realize that.
Yeah, it's such a flagrant foul when you leave magnesium out of the equation. Yeah. When you look at your body, the whole electrical currency, is based on the big four. Sodium and potassium get the wave of depolarization that will release the calcium into the synaptic cleft. And magnesium is modulating the calcium. So in the synaptic cleft, you need magnesium in that energy source to make your neurotransmitters, to release your neurotransmitters. Well, calcium will release the neurotransmitter, but it's magnesium that's making the neurotransmitter in that synaptic cleft in the mitochondria. So there's that balance of calcium, magnesium, sodium, potassium, the big four that run every electrical conduit in the body, whether it's the brain, the heart, the cell membrane pumps, or the contraction of a muscle, whether it's a cardiac muscle, smooth muscle, or a skeletal muscle, all depend on the big four. So we have to be able to evaluate the big four more intelligently, so we get a feel for what the body is doing. And that's why hair tissue gives us the greatest insight into that.
Absolutely. And it's interesting when you talk about the big four, because there's two things that practitioners who are interpreting HTMA tend to do, and they themselves can be a little overwhelmed, because there's a lot of interrelationships between minerals that have to be taken into account when you're analyzing a client's results, but not realizing that the big four have such a huge impact. Right? So sometimes we only have to go that far and then expand later. So let's talk about the interrelationships of minerals, because I think that's really important in order for someone to actually have a proper analysis done on a test result.
Absolutely. That's a great question, because if you want to understand the status of magnesium, you have to understand a concept called the anti-nutrient concept. What blocks magnesium? We know copper is antagonistic to magnesium. We know that cadmium is very antagonistic to magnesium. To understand the status of a nutrient mineral, you need to know the status of the anti-nutrient, such as mercury and lead and arsenic and all these toxic metals. So when you see zinc, for example, on the periodic table, zinc is number 30. Right under zinc sits cadmium. Right under cadmium sits mercury. One ion of mercury can displace thousands of ions of zinc. So to understand the status of zinc, you need to understand the status of mercury or cadmium or copper, because they're all antagonistic to zinc. Without zinc, nothing in the body will work, because it's involved in 200 enzymatic functions in the body. Every time that we have to break down carbon dioxide, you just can't dump a acid carbon dioxide into the blood. It has to be broken down. And to break down carbon dioxide, the enzyme that does that is carbonic anhydrase. That carbonic anhydrase enzyme is zinc dependent. So every CO2 molecule in us has to be broken down. And so if it's being broken down in the lungs, you're going to see that enzyme in the lungs or in the kidneys or in the stomach. And so it's such an important factor of how important zinc is, because we're always producing CO2. And so if we don't understand how mercury blocks it, cadmium blocks it, copper blocks it, then we never really understand the totality, the full picture of where these nutrient minerals are. Because you can have zinc looking normal on a hair test, and yet you haven't mobilized the heavy metals out, which displays zinc. So that's why you need to see the anti-nutrient concept. And that's why you just can't do replacement therapy. You got to understand the big picture.
Absolutely. And again, so important, because without those interrelationships, you really can't get a true picture of what's happening in the body.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Give me your thoughts on vitamin D. I always love talking about vitamin D because everybody has so many different thoughts, and I know what mine are. So tell me what yours are. I want to hear.
You know, it's here comes back to that understanding, you never want to look at one nutrient in isolation. So in the history of, popular culture, calcium was vogue, back in the 70s, 80s. Vitamin C was hip at one time. Resveratrol was hip. So we always start peddling this, and right now it's vitamin D is the buzzword.
Yes.
But to activate vitamin D, you need magnesium. So the more vitamin D you're taking, the more magnesium you're utilizing to activate the vitamin D. So vitamin D is absolutely important, but you just can't go nilly-willy start pumping, 10,000 IUs of vitamin D without understanding the big picture. Because again, if you're taking in a lot of vitamin D, you're going to burn through your magnesium. Remember, I keep saying magnesium is the most important nutrient mineral in the mineral matrix. And if we're utilizing too much magnesium to activate the vitamin D, then we're losing that magnesium for the 2,000 other enzymatic functions that magnesium does. That was a little over exaggeration, but we know that magnesium is absolutely vital for so many enzymes. It's the number one nutrient for activating enzymes, and especially ATP. So when you need that ATP and you're just blowing it on vitamin D, that's a flagrant foul. And so maybe if you have low calcium on a hair tissue analysis, you're in a 4 low, I could see where vitamin D comes into play. But if you have the high calcium, you're going to increase the calcium, you're going to increase soft tissue calcification. And again, that's another flagrant foul, because that soft tissue calcification is the death of us all, because that can deposit in the heart as arteriosclerosis, brain plaquing in our brain, cataracts, all the joint stuff. Those are calcium deposits that just basically is premature aging. And so vitamin D can increase the premature aging if you're already in a high calcium pattern. So that's why you just can't go taking vitamin D. You have to put it into perspective.
Absolutely.
Hope that answered the question.
It did, absolutely. And intelligent illumination, I think a lot of people forget about that. And I talk to it with my clients all the time. And just supporting the natural processes of the body in order to make its own vitamin D rather than supplementing. When you really may not know, if you've never done a hair test, for example, you might not know what those other levels look like, and you could be causing more havoc than good.
Yep.
Yeah. Give us there's, the big 4 minerals, we kind of touched on those already. And so, I mean, there's tons of symptoms related to the big 4 that someone can be experiencing. So tell us about a case study where you had a client where they needed HTMA to get to the root cause of what was happening. Do you have a specific one you want to mention?
I don't have one patient, I have every patient.
Fair enough. You sound like me.
Every patient really has a mineral dysregulation. And if we don't balance that out, we don't fix anything.
Yeah.
And so this is why when we're looking at a hair test, we have to see that, boy, most of my patients, low sodium, low potassium, high calcium, high magnesium. That's slow oxidation. That is premature aging. And if we don't address this, that will lead to every symptom under the sun. You know, some people it may mean more of the cancer, some may it be more of the brain neurodegenerative diseases, such as the dementia diseases, the Parkinson's, the Alzheimer's. And so this is why the mineral test is the greatest single test that we have to assess the nutrient, minerals, and the toxic metals, because we have to deal with that if we want to get healthy. Or we're just going to be running like a dog chasing his tail forever and a day, going around and around, getting nowhere. But when we start balancing out the minerals, now we have a real fighting chance of exalting our health to a better place. But we have to understand how important the minerals are. So I don't have one case study. I have every patient.
Good. Well, I'm happy to hear that. And for those who've never done, who are listening, watching, and have never done an HTMA, it can be truly life-changing. And I mean, again, getting to the root cause of the issue is what made me fall in love with it, because I had copper toxicity. And so that was just like, oh my goodness, how come everything that I try isn't working? And then I stumbled upon HTMA with Dr. Rick Malter, and it just kind of took off from there. And I mean, so let's talk copper, because that was my problem, and that's a lot of people's problem. Nowadays, it's becoming an epidemic.
It is an epidemic, you know. So I was born, my mom, the first thing my mom told me about my birthing experience was I was born jaundiced. So being born jaundiced, you know, the number one cause of jaundice is copper. So when you look at copper is it's the second most electrical metal in the body. That's why electricians love copper wiring, because it moves the electrons. Now, the electrons are the chemical secret to life. It's how when we move electrons, that's what gets the job done. And so copper has a love affair with oxygen, with making bonds, breaking bonds, and it's so electrical that we have to understand it. And so when you look at copper, it's involved in all oxygenase enzymes, from the cytochrome C, making your energy. The final step in the electron transport chain. This is in the very last step, where we're moving these electrons through these iron sulfur clusters, where finally the last, where we hand the baton off of the electrons, is the copper. And then copper will donate its electrons to the phosphate to make the ATP, and the magnesium will bind to the phosphate to utilize it. It will be the spark to burn that ATP. But if copper can be, when it's dysregulated, it won't fit into that cytochrome C. And then too much excess copper can bully out the magnesium and block the magnesium from binding to that phosphate tail, and then we can't burn that energy. So copper is needed for the your biogenic amines, your dopamines, your histamines, your adrenaline. So without that copper, you can't make those hormones that make you feel good. Without that copper, you can't do the cross-linking of the connective tissue. So it's involved in all collagen synthesis, and it allows the cross-linking of the collagen, so you have tight collagen so it doesn't tear and rip. And that could be the hemorrhoids, that could be the stretch marks, that could be the varicosities, that could be the aortic aneurysm. That's why copper is such an instrumental nutrient, but it needs that Goldilocks place. Too much, detrimental; too little, detrimental. It has to be in that sweet spot, and that's why copper is such a huge thing. Now, I could have told you 2,000 years ago we would have a copper toxicity based on astrology, because what age do we live in? We're in the Bronze Age. Bronze, now this was what tells us bronze is 90% copper, 10% tin. Alchemy tells us that tin is the metal of the liver. So we know that copper is regulated in the liver, and that's why we're in the Bronze Age. And so I could have told you again, like, wow, we're going to have to deal with this copper, because the 4 great ages, the Iron Age, the Bronze Age, the Silver Age, the Golden Age, are based off of the oldest metals known to mankind. And so what keeps the copper high? Copper is from the planet Venus, the most feminine planet in our solar system. And so what's the most feminine hormone in us? Estrogen. So wherever
Estrogen,
the
yeah.
estrogens go, the copper goes. How do we know that? When a woman's pregnant, her estrogens climb off the charts. Copper almost doubles when you're pregnant. So we know how intimately related copper and estrogen are. And the reason why copper is so high is because of all the fake estrogens, the xenoestrogens. Since day one, we've been inundated with these fake estrogens, these imposters, these Benedict Arnolds that look like an estrogen, smell like an estrogen, but they're not an estrogen, and they keep the copper high. And so when copper stays high, copper is very, very reactive. Like I said, it's very electrical. It's the second most electrical element on the periodic table. So we have to be able to bind that copper and to be able to regulate the copper. And this is where the liver and the adrenals control copper. The hormone, the longevity hormone made by your adrenals called DHEA, 50% is made in the brain, 50% of it's made in the adrenals. And so the adrenals send that signal to the liver to bind the copper, to dump the copper, so it regulates the copper in the liver. But all roads lead to the liver, so if we don't clean out the liver, we're going to get biliary stasis, and we're not going to be able to dump the copper. So with the high estrogens keeping the copper high, with the adrenal fatigue, with the low DHEA, we can't regulate copper. This is why we have to put the spotlight on copper, especially in the Bronze Age, which is the age of copper. Now, one other side note, even in Botticelli's iconic painting, The Birth of Venus, that painting was painted in Cyprus. The word Cyprus in Latin means what? Copper.
Oh my goodness. I did not know that. That's incredible. Wow. I can't believe
a lot of correlations.
Tons of correlations. And I mean, just with the use, just with everything, especially with women using hormonal birth control, non-hormonal IUDs, copper IUDs, all those things, copper is, I want to say about 70% of my clients that I have copper toxicity that they're trying to work through due to all of these exposures.
Yep, these exposures are detrimental if we don't deal with it. You know, like you said, the hormone replacement therapies, the foods are loaded with all these xenoestrogens. You know, we're breathing them in, so that keeps the copper high. And if we can't dump the copper, copper is very reactive, and it will oxidize everything. And so copper doesn't want to be single and free. It needs to be bound, just like the planet Venus always wants to be in a relationship. And so copper wants to be in a relationship, so it needs to be bound so it can be, moved to its destination site, so it can be incorporated into the cytochrome C or into the monoamine oxidases or into the tyranase enzyme, so it can do its job.
Yeah. And so one of the things that's important for copper metabolism is ceruloplasmin. So tell us a little bit about that. And I mean, people who are copper toxic with adrenal dysfunction, their adrenals are not operating at a high level, then obviously ceruloplasmin production suffers.
Yeah. Ceruloplasmin is the main copper chaperone in the body. And ceruloplasmin is made where? In the liver. And so that liver is so important. Like I always say, all roads lead to the liver. So the liver is processing, the liver makes your cholesterol, your bilirubin, your hormones. I mean, it does a gazillion jobs. So understanding that ceruloplasmin is synthesized in the liver, this is why we always got to put the spotlight on the liver. Now, ceruloplasmin also has to do with the ferroxidase enzyme, and that's why copper regulates the iron. That's a big note, because that ferroxidase enzyme is that ceruloplasmin acting as an iron transporter, because you need the copper of the ceruloplasmin to take the ferrous iron, which is very reactive, to transport it into the ferric, the Fe3 iron. So the Fe3 iron can be bound into the transferrin, so transferrin can shuttle the oxygen to where it needs to go, mostly into the myoglobin, the hemoglobin, but iron's involved in many other functions as well. So ceruloplasmin, in my opinion, ceruloplasmin is, copper is not directly associated with the making of ceruloplasmin. It's indirectly associated with copper because it's the main copper chaperone.
Right.
So you want that ceruloplasmin has 6 copper atoms to make the ceruloplasmin. And then that's when the ceruloplasmin is called holoceruloplasmin. That's when it's going to immediately leave the liver to deal, to modulate the iron with the ferrooxidase, or to move the copper to the mitochondria for the cytochrome C, or move the copper to, to making your biogenic amines, or to move the copper to make your connective tissues, or to move the copper to wherever it needs to go. So ceruloplasmin is absolutely important, but we put too much spotlight on just ceruloplasmin. We need to put the spotlight on copper because, to make that ceruloplasmin, the liver has to work. If the liver isn't working, you're not going to make ceruloplasmin. Most of us are walking around with fatty livers, stagnant livers, the biliary ducts, because the main regulatory force of removing the copper is through the biliary system. And most of us have biliary stagnation. We're not moving the bile. And so one of the key aspects for copper metabolism is bile. And so I wouldn't put the spotlight on ceruloplasmin. I'd put the spotlight on making bile, moving bile, regulating bile, because that's the key to dealing with copper. And so you can have low ceruloplasmin, in like Wilson's disease, Menge's disease, and so that's a real genetic thing that you have to look at. So I understand that ceruloplasmin connection to having, that genetic defect. What is it? The ATP B7 gene, I think, is the Wilson gene that
yeah, I think you're right.
That gets that ceruloplasmin and the copper into the ceruloplasmin. And if you have that faulty gene, then that copper will build up in the liver, and once the liver threshold reaches its maximum, then that copper will be moved through the blood and will oxidize the heart, the brain, the eyes, or any organ that it goes to. So ceruloplasmin is important, but you could have high ceruloplasmin when you're pregnant. You could have high ceruloplasmin with non-Hodgkin's lymphoma, things of that nature. What else causes? Estrogens cause high ceruloplasmin. So we have to look at ceruloplasmin, but again, we have to put the spotlight on copper and the liver that makes the ceruloplasmin, that regulates the ceruloplasmin. So I don't get so bogged down with trying to say, what nutrient do I need to make ceruloplasmin? That's a waste of time, waste of energy. Focus on how are we going to make bile so we can mobilize the copper out? How do we pick up the adrenals, the DHEA, the longevity hormone, so it can start understanding that communication to tell the liver what to do with the ceruloplasmin, so it can, that DHEA says make the ceruloplasmin to bind the copper, to dump the copper, or to circulate it to where it needs to go. So I see a lot of talk with just ceruloplasmin. I think it's a lot of wasted energy, in my opinion.
Okay,
but
yeah.
It is important, but again, the spotlight has to be on copper.
Makes sense. That makes total sense. And so to touch on copper again, because I've seen this in a couple of different clients have asked me, and it's kind of becoming more of a fad, and that is people drinking from copper cups. How do you feel about that?
I think that's a flagrant foul, because when copper is in the ionic form, it's going to miss digestion. It's going to get absorbed right into the blood. I have nothing wrong with people eating copper foods so digestion can break it down and deal with the copper intelligently. But when that copper, most of the piping is copper piping, and so that water has a high content of copper that gets right into the blood. And if you're already copper toxic, you don't have a chance to add the intelligence to copper metabolism when it just gets right into the blood. So I'm not a big fan of drinking from copper pipes or piping in general. So I think that needs to be looked at more intelligently.
Okay. Yeah, I would tend to agree. And just because I think that a lot of people, again, copper toxicity is running rampant in society. It's becoming an epidemic, and a lot of people don't even realize they have it. So they're making these choices based on misinformation because they really don't know what's happening at the cellular level in their body at that point in time, in order for them to make an educated decision about what they should and shouldn't do to benefit themselves. And I think that's where a lot of the choices come from that may not be exactly what they need at that time.
Yep.
So we touched on this earlier too, and this is a huge one as well. And that's the calcium. So we talked about elevated calcium and a little bit, and just now I want to expand and talk about the calcium shell, because again, out of all the clients tested at the lab, at Trace Elements, 80% are slow oxidizers. Slow oxidizers have elevated calcium in the tissues, which are causing all those other issues that you spoke about earlier. And so let's talk about the calcium shell a little bit.
Yeah. When you're copper toxic, that calcium goes high to protect the ravages of copper, because it's going to put the brakes on the copper so you don't go crazy, because you will go crazy. So
I went crazy. I went crazy. I'm not going to lie.
Yeah.
You can't control yourself. Yeah.
A deadening agent to that highly reactive, highly charged copper. So, again, looking at that Botticelli iconic painting of the birth of Venus, you see the beautiful goddess Aphrodite sitting on what? The oyster shell. And so all these sea creatures that have shells, like the oyster, the clams, the lobsters, they breathe using what? Copper. We breathe using iron. They breathe using copper, and that releases the calcium. So we see from nature how important copper is in regulating calcium. Yeah. And so that's that intimate relation of copper and calcium. And when copper is high and dysregulated, that calcium has to go high to protect you. But then it's a kind of like it protects you, but then it will kill you if we don't deal with that high calcium, because that high calcium in the end will get us all in the end. But we want to slow down that calcium from depositing in the heart or in the brain or in the joints or in the kidneys as our kidney stones or gallstones or wherever we get these deposits. So we absolutely see the copper and the calcium connection. And that's why if we don't deal with copper, the calcium will kill us in the end. And so that's why it has to be regulated. So as we break down the shell, all these emotions start percolating. All the things that we swept under the rug start coming to fruition. So we have to be psychologically ready to start dumping this copper as the shell starts breaking down. Because if we haven't dealt with some of these issues, they will recirculate. This is why healing is a journey. It's not just, break the shell and we're good. You have to be able to process those traumas that kept the calcium high. And when that calcium comes down, it can be emotionally unsettling. And so we do have to look at it, and understanding that copper calcium connection is vital for human health.
Absolutely.
So there's so much more to it.
I know. And we could this could be a 5-hour podcast, right? Just on these two topics, because there's just so much.
There is so much to it, but once we understand that, when calcium precipitates out of solution, it will bind to, calcium's a cation. It will bind to any acid. It will bind to an oxalate, a urate, a calcium oxalate, a uric acid, a phosphoric acid, a lactic acid. And those are the crystals that clog the machine. They become cogs in the wheel, slowing down this enzyme or that enzyme. So we have to understand how important this calcium is. To deal with the calcium, you got to deal with the copper. And if we don't deal with the copper, we don't deal with the calcium. And if we don't deal with the calcium, calcium is connected to Saturn. Saturn is father time. It has everything to do with aging and death and darkness and all those themes. So we want to slow down that premature aging by dealing with the calcium. To deal with the calcium, you got to deal with the copper.
Yeah,
That's the simple
absolutely.
nutshell.
And again, you know, I feel like a lot of people nowadays are looking for that magic solution, right? That magic pill that's going to make them feel amazing again. And just to really understand, and I feel like just with speaking to you, I feel like you do this with your, I know I do with my clients, and it's educating them about the journey, because it is, right? We're on a wellness journey to feel great and be healthy for the rest of our lives, not to find a magic pill that's going to make us feel better. I think that's a bit unrealistic.
Right.
And mineral balance is key.
Mineral balance is key. And, when we see that these metals are layered, your body isn't just, for example, your body's not just going to dump all the mercury. We could evict all the mercury out of your tissues. We take that mercury, put it in a syringe, inject it back into you, you would die. Your body intelligently layers it. And so it's going to dump these metals in certain intervals, as the adrenals pick up, as the all-seeing brain says, oh, we have biliary patency, we can start mobilizing metals out so they don't get reabsorbed into the blood, which will be very damaging and life-threatening. So there's an intelligence to the body, so nothing happens overnight. We have to be vigilant in our approach to mineral balancing and detoxification. We have to have patience along the journey. We have to be able to understand the emotional components as things come up along the journey. So it takes courage. It's a hero's journey, healing. And the hero's journey is through, it's the most amazing journey when we have the courage to go on it and to not, suppress it with all the garbage that we've been suppressing it with since day one, with the antibiotics and all the other drugs that we've been inundated with. So we've got to really have that hero's mentality, say we're going to work through it, we're going to start breaking the shell down, one day at a time. We're going to do the detox homework. In doing the detox homework, we got to have health practices. And so having a health practice, you can't do everything all the time. But you have to be committed to doing something every day for your health. So you have to have these practices, and you have to have that commitment to your practices. So, because health is the greatest wealth. So if we don't deal with the copper, at the end of the day, if you do not deal with your copper, it'll either be too much apoptosis, which is cell death causing all the neurodegenerative diseases, or no apoptosis, which is cancer. So if we don't deal with that copper, it'll either be too much apoptosis or too little apoptosis. And that's why we must deal with this copper.
Yeah. Excellent. Wow. And that's a very powerful picture that you just painted there, because it's true. And just dealing with that and being able to know what the mineral levels are. Like I really, in the intro was the revolutionary testing, and it really is, because it tells us so much about what's happening at a level in the body that blood tests and other tests just cannot do. And again, mineral balance is key. So
it really is the key. And, and I always say we got to do serial hair tissue analysis, because one test, you're not going to get a lot out of one. You can get a lot, but generally speaking, you have to see the patterns as we start putting in, the molybdenum and the zinc, and we start evicting out the copper, and we can see patterns. And so every time I see a metal dump, that's a celebration. Even though when the metal comes out, it may cause an aggravation, because, it may aggravate the kidneys, and that may cause sodium to go high. Sodium is the most volatile mineral on the periodic table. And so when sodium is influenced by the dumping of a metal, you will feel unstable. You will be very reactive. Usually something that doesn't bother you, you'll have a knee-jerk reflex on the simplest, least provocative things that usually don't bother you, now set you off. Or it may be a headache or a skin irritation, or blood pressure may vary during metal dumps. So that's why we have to look at serial hair tissue levels. And every time I see metals coming out of someone, oh, you dumped your Alzheimer's, you dumped your cancer, you dumped your Parkinson's, you dumped all this garbage, and it doesn't happen overnight. And that's why I love serial hair testing, so we can start seeing, wow, we're really exalting our health every time we're dumping these metals out. And it's a beautiful thing. And that's why I think it's the greatest single test that we have to really assess the nutrient, minerals, and the toxic metals.
And I agree 100%. So tell our viewers and listeners, I mean, you're located in Chicago, but you work with people remotely, you know, and you're obviously super passionate about the health of the people that come to you. So share with them how they can work with you or how they can get in touch with you.
In Chicago, my office is Back to Natural Health. From a distant perspective, it's nevergetsick.net, I think.
I'll have that in the description. I'll get that from you and put it in the description.
So the Never Get Sick is more for my distant patients. And I'm pretty selective on who I take. If I don't think I can help you, I won't take you. Because when I'm interviewing patients, they're interviewing me, I'm interviewing you. I have to see, can we work together? Are you willing to do the homework? Are you willing to, you know, make the sacrifices needed that you need to make? Maybe you got to quit those cigarettes. Maybe you got to change that diet. Maybe you got to start hitting those coffee enemas or those saunas. And so I got to make sure that when I'm working with someone that you have the right mentality for me to help move you in a favorable direction. And it doesn't happen overnight. Like I said, it's a journey.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And so I will have all of those links for anyone who wishes to get in touch with Dr. Robert in the description and on the last slide if you're watching on YouTube. So thank you so much for that. Oh my gosh, I can't believe time has passed so quickly. And I mean, this topic is so near and dear to my heart. Again, I could talk about it for weeks weeks on end, just because it means so much to me. So thank you so much for being with us today.
It was a pleasure, and thank you for having me.
Excellent. So for those of you watching on YouTube, make sure you subscribe to my channel. There's a brand new podcast and a brand new video every single week. Give us a thumbs up if you like this episode. And if you're listening on your favorite podcast host, give us a like, and we'll see you next time. Thanks for listening to today's show. Head on over to Killah, KILLAH.org to gain access to some amazing resources that will help you gain energy, rid yourself of debilitating symptoms, and be the best version of you. Remember to give this podcast a like and follow me on Instagram at coach.killah. I'm here every 2 weeks with a brand new episode of the Human Optimization Podcast. Until next time.